Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasulahu. Amma ba'du, fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'anil Hakim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu la tuhrimu tayyibati ma ahallallahu lakum wa la ta'tadu. Inna Allaha la yuhibbul mu'tadin. Wa kulu mimma razaqakumullahu halalan tayyiba. Wattaqullaha allazi antum bihi mu'minun. Sadaqallahul azim. The two verses I have recited translate as follows. O you who believe, do not forbid the good things which Allah has made lawful for you, and do not exceed the limits. Surely Allah does not love those who exceed the limits. And eat out of the lawful and good things that Allah has given you, and keep your duty to Allah, in whom you believe. And this is chapter 5, Surah Al-Mā'idah, verses 87 to 88. Usually people think of religion as teaching rules which forbid and prohibit various things. In case of Islam, we see Muslims being very concerned about whether a certain thing or the use of a certain thing is what they call haram or not. At first sight, it might seem preferable and cautious to avoid anything which you think or which you even remotely suspect might be disallowed. Then it is guaranteed that you can't be doing anything which is disallowed and wrong. The Holy Quran, in the first of the two verses that I recited, tells Muslims not to declare something as forbidden which Allah has allowed, and not to exceed the limit in self-denial, in denying yourself or your community, in self-denial of what is allowed. This first verse does not specifically mention food as being what is meant by the good things which Allah has made lawful for you. So we may take it more generally. Now we may think that no Muslim can possibly declare something as disallowed which Allah has explicitly allowed. Yet if you take the case of, for example, the concessions that Allah has allowed us in our observance of religion, such as exemption from fasting those days in Ramadan when one is ill or traveling, or the rights Allah has allowed us in making some decisions in our lives, such as marriage or what profession to follow to earn one's livelihood. In all these matters, we see in Muslim societies people saying, yes, Allah has allowed such and such a thing, but it is better not to do it. In effect, what they are doing is forbidding what Allah has allowed, although they are not doing it by their words, but by their actions and by their disapproval. Now this forbidding of good things by Muslims to their own selves can also be seen in cases of technological inventions. The printing press was invented in Europe in the 1400s, and this enabled the mass production of books, which was not previously possible because, of course, books had to be written out by hand. Now, the printing press was taken up in Europe, and within about 150 years, millions of printed books had been sold in Europe. What did Muslims do? A Muslim writer has published a well-researched article, and the title of that article is How the Failure to Adopt the Printing Press by Muslims Gave Europeans a 300-year advantage over Muslims. And I'll now quote from that article. He writes, "The printing press was invented in 1436. It had already spread throughout Europe and even reached Mexico. Within 20 years of its invention, Muslims began hearing about this new invention and seeing copies of these books that appeared magically and miraculously. When Muslims first encountered the printing press, the first thing they did was to ban it. In 1485, the Ottoman Caliph, Sultan Bayezid II, declared, with the full support of all the ulama, he declared the printing press to be haram. Now I've been quoting this from the article by that Muslim researcher. Now, only 7 years after this ban in the Ottoman Empire, it so happened that in Spain, Muslim rule was overthrown by the new Christian rulers, and they expelled a large number of Muslims and Jews from Spain. Others they converted by force. Now, a significant number of the Jews from Spain sought shelter in the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And some of the Jews, while they were living in Spain, had printing presses. So they asked the Sultan for permission to have them under his rule as well. And I will now again quote from that article about showing what the article writer says. He writes, "The Sultan agreed, but with the condition that the presses were exclusively for the Jews to be used in their language for their own people. Furthermore, they were prohibited from selling these presses to Muslims. As a result, the Jews and later on the Christians acquired private printing presses that they utilized for the education of their respective communities. It is no coincidence that in Ottoman lands, the most educated bureaucratic classes comprised Jews and Christians, including doctors, engineers, and other professionals, and physicians, in other words, doctors, physicians in particular, were predominantly Christians." So this is the end of the quotation from that article. Now you may say in a light-hearted way that these restrictions which were applied to the printing press were just like the restrictions applied in Muslim countries to the sale of alcohol. Non-Muslims living under Muslim rule are allowed to buy and use alcohol, but they cannot sell or give it to Muslims. Similarly, at that time in the Ottoman Turkish Empire, non-Muslims could install printing presses, but only for their own use and not to be given to Muslims. So the printing press was exactly as haram as alcohol. Now this article also notes that the first printed copies of the Quran, printed on a printing press, it says they were created by non-Muslims for non-Muslims, since Muslims refused to engage in printing presses. The first printed copy of the Quran was produced in 1537 in Venice, Italy. The second printed copy of the Quran or the second printed edition of the Quran, appeared in 1694 in Hamburg, produced by a Jewish printer. And its copies can still be found in Germany. And he goes on to say that the third edition is located in Russia, yet Muslims continue to resist embracing the printing press. So this is the Arabic text of the Holy Quran that he is talking about. Now, it was in the 1700s, about 3 centuries after the invention of the printing press in Europe, that there was a minister in the Ottoman Turkish government, and he in fact was a Hungarian convert to Islam. So he wasn't a born Muslim either. He persuaded the Grand Mufti to allow printing presses to be set up. The Grand Mufti gave permission, but he gave that permission on condition that nothing should be printed in Arabic, nothing should be printed relating to the religion of Islam, but only books on non-religious subjects could be printed. And it was only in the 1800s that a printing press was established in a Muslim country, in Egypt, and at first it printed only government manuals, books for army training and textbooks, and later on it went on to print Islamic literature. And it's astonishing to note that the use of the printing press in Muslim countries to produce Islamic books only started as late as after the birth of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Sahib, founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, which you can see is a relatively recent event. Another similar tragedy was repeated in the Indian subcontinent. Previously I was talking about the Ottoman Turkish Empire, but now the Indian subcontinent. During British rule of India, many Muslim religious scholars declared it as unlawful for Muslims to pursue modern education given in English. On the other hand, non-Muslim communities in India, in particular the Hindus, embraced modern education, and they surged ahead of the Muslims in all walks of educated and professional life. And the damaging effects of this lagging behind for Muslims, they persist till the present day. Now, there were also other technological developments apart from the printing press, which were declared initially by the Muslim religious leaders as forbidden and against Islam for Muslims to use. But of course, later on they had no choice but to allow them to be used. They opposed photography on the grounds that it's like making idols. They opposed the loudspeaker on the grounds that the Holy Quran forbids people to make a loud noise like a donkey. And it was at such a time in the Indian subcontinent that the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement, Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, proclaimed that all these modern developments in communications, which allow the fast and mass spread of information all over the world, that these are the means brought about by Allah so that His word may spread to all parts of the world. And of course, as I said, the ulama would forbidden these things, then circumstances and events left them with no choice but to allow them, which is a further humiliation for them. Now, among the good things which Muslims forbade to themselves was translating the Quran from Arabic into other languages. Even less than 100 years ago, some Muslim religious scholars in Egypt opposed the efforts of Mr. Marmaduke Pickthall to publish an English translation of the Quran when he went to Egypt in 1930 to complete his task. Yet, long before this, Christians, in their efforts to convert Muslims all over the world to Christianity, had translated the Bible into almost all languages of the world. Now, the first verse which I recited, the one beginning, "O you who believe, do not forbid the good things which Allah has made lawful for you." As I said, this does not mention food, so we took it generally, the good things which Allah has allowed for you. The second verse does mention food when it says, "And eat of the lawful and good things which Allah has given you." And there is another verse in the next chapter, chapter 6, which sheds more light on this. And that verse says, and I will read the whole of it in translation, the Holy Prophet is commanded by Allah to say, "I do not find in what is revealed to me anything forbidden for an eater to eat, except if it is something which dies of itself, or blood poured forth, or the flesh of swine, for surely that is unclean, and what is a transgression where a name other than the name of Allah has been invoked on it. But whoever is driven by necessity, not desiring, nor exceeding the limit, then surely your Lord is forgiving, merciful." And this is chapter 6, verse 145. Now notice here that this wording of the verse could just have said, "These things are forbidden," and then given a list, as this verse does. But instead of that, it tells the Holy Prophet to say that in his revelation, there is nothing forbidden to eat. There is nothing forbidden to eat except the following list. And there are 2 points as regards this wording that we may deduce. Firstly, the prohibition relates only to eating the things mentioned. It does not forbid their use for purposes other than eating. And it mentions eating twice by saying that "I do not find in what is revealed to me anything forbidden for an eater to eat." For an eater to eat. So it relates to just eating those things. And secondly, the items in that list are the only ones forbidden for a Muslim to eat, because it clearly says that nothing is forbidden except these. It doesn't say these are forbidden. It says nothing is forbidden except for these. Now, Muslims, trying to be extra careful, sometimes think that the use of these forbidden things is prohibited for every purpose. Some Muslims have expressed concerns about blood transfusions and accepting organ donations. But their concerns are not justified by the Holy Quran. Every creation has some use and benefit for humans. It is the manner of use in a certain way which becomes forbidden. In this case, eating. In the end part of this verse, even the eating of forbidden items is allowed in case of forced or unavoidable need. And this further shows, if they can be even eaten in case of unavoidable need, it further shows that their use for valid purposes other than eating is perfectly allowable. Now, as regards the permission to eat these forbidden things in case of dire necessity, it could happen that someone is in a situation where there is nothing available to eat except a forbidden thing. Although it seems unlikely really that someone would ever be in a position where nothing at all was available to it except a forbidden thing. But anyhow, it is for such a situation. But more likely, there have been deplorable incidents in the past history of religious intolerance when Muslims under persecution were forced to eat pork under the threat of being killed if they refused to do so. I mentioned earlier the reconquest of Spain by Christians in the 1400s. Well, these new rulers were extremely intolerant, and they forced many Jews and Muslims in Spain to embrace the Catholic religion. And these people, Muslims and Jews, they were required to prove that they had actually become Christians and were not just saying it to save their lives. And the way of proving this was for them to be fed with pork in front of the new religious authorities of Spain. Otherwise, they ruled that your conversion to Christianity was false and a pretense. And we see, in a way, this happens with Ahmadis in Pakistan, that an Ahmadi might deny that he is an Ahmadi to save his life and to continue his normal activities in life. But they are not satisfied with his declaration merely that I'm not an Ahmadi. They then want that person to curse and abuse the founder of the Ahmadiyya movement and to declare all Ahmadis as disbelievers as well before they will believe that he is actually now no longer an Ahmadi. So that is really not much different from the intolerant Christian rulers of Spain forcing Muslims, and of course Jews as well, to eat pork in order to prove that they have actually left their previous religion. Now, according to Islam, if a person remained Muslim at heart, it would not have been a sin for him to submit to this form of coercion, because the alternative was to face execution. And so this verse ends by assuring people who face such situations and are compelled to do such things against their will, but only to save their lives. It says at the end, this verse, then surely your Lord is forgiving, merciful. So from this, we can see how wisely, liberally, and comprehensively the Holy Quran has dealt with the question of what is prohibited, and it has not burdened Muslims with impractical burdens to bear. So may Allah enable us to follow the teachings of the Holy Quran in this light. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quranil Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim. Innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malakun barurur rahim.